Have you ever wondered what it would feel like to wake up in a world where your hometown simply doesn't exist? What if we told you right now that there are documented testimonies from real people who claim they've been to alternate versions of our reality where entire major cities are completely missing? If you're thinking this sounds like pure science fiction and that there must be a logical explanation for everything, then we're really curious to hear how you'll explain these 12 deeply unsettling cases. These aren't just stories. These are testimonies from ordinary travelers, pilots, truck drivers, and everyday people who swear they've seen versions of Earth where cities like New York, Tokyo, or Paris never existed at all. Some came back with photographs, others brought physical evidence, and a few never came back the same. So, let's jump straight into the first testimony. And this one will absolutely shake everything you think you know about reality. In October of 1996, experienced commercial airline pilot Takeshi Yamamoto was flying a routine domestic flight from Osaka to Tokyo when something happened that would haunt him for the rest of his career. As he approached what should have been the sprawling megalopolis of Tokyo, one of the largest and most densely populated cities on Earth, he looked down through clear skies and saw absolutely nothing. No buildings, no lights, no infrastructure. Just empty forests and coastline where 37 million people should have been living. The incident you're about to hear is said to have truly happened, and it's considered one of the most disturbing alternate timeline testimonies ever recorded by aviation authorities. Yamamoto had been flying commercial aircraft for Japan Airlines for over 18 years. He knew the Tokyo approach like the back of his hand, having made this exact flight hundreds of times. He was known among his colleagues as steady, reliable, and absolutely not the type to panic or make things up. On that particular evening, he had 163 passengers on board, clear weather conditions, and perfect visibility. Everything about the flight was completely routine until they reached their descent altitude. At approximately 6:45 p.m. local time, as the aircraft descended through 10,000 feet, Yamamoto looked out his cockpit window to see the familiar sight of Tokyo's glittering lights spreading across the Kanto plain. But what he saw instead made his heart stop. Where the endless urban sprawl should have been, he saw only darkness. Not the darkness of a power outage, but the darkness of complete absence. Think about this for a moment. Imagine being absolutely certain of where you are, having flown this route countless times, and suddenly the entire city is just gone. His co-pilot, Hiroshi Tanaka, noticed it at the exact same moment. Both men stared in disbelief as their instruments showed them on the correct approach path to Tokyo International Airport, but their eyes showed them approaching an empty coastline with scattered forests. Yamamoto immediately radioed air traffic control, expecting to hear about some massive technical failure, or perhaps an issue with his aircraft's navigation systems, but the response he received was even more disturbing. Air traffic control responded normally, guiding them through their standard approach to Tokyo as if nothing was wrong. They were clearly seeing the city on their radar screens. Now, here's where it gets even stranger. For approximately 7 minutes, Yamamoto and Tanaka flew toward what should have been Tokyo while seeing absolutely nothing below them. The plane's instruments worked perfectly. The GPS coordinates were correct. The radio communications were normal, but through the windscreen, they saw only wilderness. Then, as they descended through 3,000 feet, something absolutely impossible happened. The city suddenly appeared. In the span of perhaps 3 or 4 seconds, the entire metropolis of Tokyo materialized below them as if someone had flipped a switch. One moment, empty land. The next moment, millions of lights, towering buildings, and the sprawling infrastructure of one of the world's great cities. Both pilots were so shaken that they reported the incident immediately after landing. Japan Airlines launched an internal investigation. The aircraft's flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder were examined. Everything showed a completely normal approach and landing. There was no evidence of any technical malfunction, no weather anomalies, nothing that could explain what the pilots had witnessed. But here's the truly chilling part. When investigators interviewed the cabin crew, 3 flight attendants reported that several passengers had also noticed something strange, asking why the city appeared so dark during the descent. The official explanation was that both pilots had experienced a simultaneous optical illusion caused by unusual atmospheric conditions. But Yamamoto rejected this explanation entirely. He insisted until his retirement in 2008 that for those 7 minutes he had been approaching a version of Japan where Tokyo had never been built. Some researchers believe this was evidence of a temporary shift between parallel timelines. Others think it might have been a glimpse into an alternate version of Earth existing alongside our own. Skeptics, of course, maintain it was nothing more than a shared hallucination or misperception. But think about this. 2 experienced pilots with a combined 30 years of flying experience, multiple flight attendants, and several passengers all noticed something wrong during those same few minutes. Their instruments showed one reality while their eyes showed another. So, what really happened in the skies over Tokyo that October evening? Did Yamamoto's aircraft briefly slip between dimensions? Was it a window into a parallel world where Tokyo never grew beyond a small coastal settlement? Or is there something about our reality that isn't as stable as we believe? Absolutely fascinating. And if you think that case was unsettling, just wait until you hear what happened to an American truck driver on a route he'd driven hundreds of times before. Michael Brennan had been driving commercial trucks across the United States for over 20 years when he experienced something in 2008 that made him question his entire understanding of reality. He was hauling a load from Milwaukee to Chicago on Interstate 94, a route he had driven literally hundreds of times before. But on this particular night in late September, after passing through the usual toll booths and seeing the familiar highway signs, he arrived at the coordinates where Chicago should be and found nothing but endless prairie. No skyline, no O'Hare Airport, no Lake Michigan shoreline development, just vast empty grasslands stretching in every direction under the moonlight. And this experienced driver wasn't alone in his vehicle that night. Brennan was a veteran of the road, the kind of driver trucking companies loved because he was dependable, professional, and had never had a single accident in 2 decades behind the wheel. On September 23, 2008, he picked up a trainee driver named Danny Foster, a 24-year-old who was completing his final supervised runs before getting his own commercial license. The 2 men left Milwaukee at around 7 p.m., hauling electronics equipment destined for a warehouse in downtown Chicago. It was supposed to be a simple 2-hour drive that would get them there before 9:30. They would never forget what happened instead. The first hour was completely normal. They chatted about the trucking business, stopped for coffee, and made good time on the interstate. Brennan pointed out landmarks to Foster as they drove, sharing tips about the best routes and truck stops. Everything was routine, but as they approached the area where Chicago's outer suburbs should begin appearing, both men noticed something strange. The highway seemed emptier than usual. Then they realized there were no lights on the horizon, no glow from the city that should have been visible for miles. Brennan checked his GPS. It showed them on I-94, approaching Chicago exactly as planned. But when they reached the coordinates where the city limits should be, the highway simply ended. Not construction, not a closed road, just ended. It turned into a dirt path that faded into tall prairie grass. Brennan stopped the truck, and both men sat in stunned silence. Imagine this for a moment. You're driving toward a city you've been to hundreds of times, a city of nearly 3 million people, and it's just not there. Foster asked if they had somehow taken a wrong turn, but Brennan knew every mile of this route. This was impossible. Now here's where it gets even stranger. They got out of the truck with flashlights and walked around. The air smelled different, cleaner, like wilderness instead of urban pollution. They could hear crickets and see stars more clearly than should be possible this close to a major city. In the distance, where the Willis Tower and the rest of Chicago's iconic skyline should have been piercing the night sky, there was nothing. Just darkness and the silhouettes of trees. Foster pulled out his cell phone to call for help, but there was no signal. Not unusual in remote areas, but they should have been in the heart of one of America's largest metropolitan areas. They stood there for nearly 20 minutes, both men trying to make sense of what they were seeing. Brennan later said it felt like they had driven into another world entirely. Then, without warning, Foster pointed toward the horizon and shouted. Lights were appearing, not gradually, but suddenly, as if someone was turning on switches across an entire city. Within 60 seconds, the familiar glow of Chicago materialized before them. The highway beneath their feet was suddenly paved again. They could hear the distant sound of traffic. The city had returned, or rather, they had returned to the city. When they finally arrived at their delivery point nearly an hour late, Brennan filed a detailed report with his company about what happened. His dispatcher was skeptical, but noted that the truck's GPS log showed something bizarre. For approximately 18 minutes, the vehicle's location data had been scrambled, showing coordinates that placed them in an area of Illinois prairie that had been undeveloped farmland over a century ago. Foster confirmed every detail of Brennan's account. Both men passed drug and alcohol tests. Neither had any history of mental health issues. The official explanation offered by the trucking company was that both men had experienced some kind of shared disorientation, perhaps from fatigue or carbon monoxide exposure from a faulty exhaust system. But the truck was inspected thoroughly and showed no mechanical problems whatsoever. Some researchers who later examined the case believe Brennan and Foster accidentally drove into a parallel timeline where Chicago was never built. Others think they may have experienced a temporary rift in space-time, offering them a glimpse of an alternate version of America where urban development never reached the shores of Lake Michigan. But think about this. Two men, both completely sober and alert, witnessed the same impossible thing. Their GPS malfunctioned in a way that showed them coordinates from a different era. The city vanished and then reappeared right before their eyes. So, what really happened on Interstate 94 that September night? Did Brennan and Foster drive through some kind of dimensional doorway? Is our reality less stable than we think? And how many other travelers might have experienced similar events but were too afraid to report them? Extremely creepy when you really think about it. Before we continue, here's a quick question for you. If you could travel to any year for just one day, which year would you choose? Go ahead and drop the year down in the comments. We can't wait to see your answers. If you're enjoying the video, make sure to subscribe and give us a thumbs up. Thank you so much. The Morrison family from Sydney booked what they thought would be the trip of a lifetime in March of 2011. Sarah and David Morrison, along with their two teenage daughters, had saved for years to visit Paris, the city of lights they'd seen in countless photographs and films. They had confirmed hotel reservations, museum tickets, and a detailed itinerary. But when their flight landed at what their boarding passes said was Charles de Gaulle Airport, they stepped into a nightmare that defied all logic. The family found themselves in a small French village surrounded by farmland. According to every person they asked, every map they consulted, and every official they desperately tried to explain their situation to, the city of Paris had never existed. Not now, not ever. The Morrisons were an ordinary middle-class family who had spent 3 years planning this vacation. David worked as an accountant, Sarah was a primary school teacher, and their daughters Emma, 17, and Chloe, 15, had been studying French in preparation for the trip. They had guidebooks, printed reservations at a hotel near the Louvre, and tickets to see the Eiffel Tower. Everything was meticulously organized. Their Singapore Airlines flight from Sydney had been perfectly normal, lasting nearly 24 hours with a layover in Singapore. Nothing unusual happened during the journey, but when the plane touched down on March 12th and the captain announced their arrival at Charles de Gaulle Airport, the family looked out their windows and felt immediate confusion. The airport looked nothing like the massive international hub they'd seen in photos. It was small, outdated, with only a handful of gates. Sarah whispered to David that maybe they had been diverted to a regional airport, but the flight crew insisted this was their scheduled destination. When they disembarked and entered the terminal, the confusion turned to genuine fear. The airport signs were in French, but everything looked wrong. There were no crowds, no international shops, no modern amenities, just a small provincial airport that looked like it belonged in the 1950s. When they approached the information desk and asked in their practiced French how to get to central Paris, the woman looked at them with complete bewilderment. She asked them to repeat the question, thinking she'd misunderstood. When David showed her their hotel reservation on his phone, she studied it carefully and then called over her supervisor. Now, here's where it gets absolutely insane. The airport officials gathered around the Morrison family, examining their documents. With growing confusion, the hotel address on their reservation listed Rue de Rivoli, a street that should run right past the Louvre Museum. But according to everyone at this airport, no such street existed. When David pulled up Google Maps on his phone, it showed Paris exactly where it should be. a massive city sprawling across both banks of the Seine River. But when he showed the map to the officials, they insisted the map was wrong. One of them brought out a physical map of France, and there, where Paris should have dominated the landscape, was only a small town called Lutetia, with a population of approximately 8,000 people. Think about this for a moment. Imagine landing in a foreign country with confirmed reservations, guidebooks, and photos of the city you're about to visit, and being told that city has never existed. The panic must have been overwhelming. Emma and Chloe started crying. Sarah demanded to speak to someone from the Australian embassy. But when officials tried to help, they discovered something even more disturbing. According to the French government records in this place, Paris as a major city was unknown. The Eiffel Tower had never been built. The Louvre was not a museum. The entire rich history of Paris simply didn't exist in this version of France. The family spent 3 hours in that small airport, desperately trying to make sense of their situation. David photographed everything: the strange airport, the maps showing no Paris, the confused officials. Then, just as French police were arriving to deal with what they assumed were confused tourists possibly suffering from some kind of group delusion, something shifted. Sarah later described it as a feeling like the world flickered. Suddenly, the airport around them transformed. It became larger, modern, bustling with international travelers. The officials they had been speaking with were gone, replaced by different staff members. They were standing in Charles de Gaulle Airport, exactly as it should be. The family immediately took a taxi into Paris, which was right where it had always been. They checked into their hotel, visited the Eiffel Tower, and tried to enjoy their vacation. But the experience haunted them. David's photographs from those 3 hours showed exactly what they described: a small regional airport and maps of France with no Paris. When they tried to report the incident to Australian authorities after returning home, they were told they'd likely experienced extreme jet lag or a shared hallucination from exhaustion. But 4 people don't all hallucinate the exact same alternate reality in perfect detail. Their photographs show something that shouldn't exist. Some researchers believe the Morrison family briefly slipped into a parallel timeline where Paris never grew beyond the small Roman settlement of Lutetia. Others think they experienced a temporary dimensional overlap, where 2 versions of France coexisted for a few hours. Skeptics insist there must be a rational explanation, perhaps an elaborate prank or misremembered details. So, what really happened to the Morrison family? Did they land in an alternate version of France where one of the world's great cities never existed? Is it possible that parallel timelines can overlap during international travel? And if so, how many other families have had similar experiences but were too afraid to speak up? Pretty terrifying when you consider how easily your entire reality could shift without warning. In the summer of 2014, a group of 6 experienced hikers set out for a weekend trek in the San Gabriel Mountains just outside Los Angeles. All of them were local residents who knew the area well and had hiked these trails dozens of times. But on the second day of their trip, when they reached a familiar overlook that normally provided breathtaking views of the Los Angeles basin and its sprawling urban landscape, they looked down and felt their blood run cold. Where one of the world's largest metropolitan areas should have spread before them, teeming with nearly 13 million people, they saw only untouched wilderness. No buildings, no roads, no signs that humans had ever settled there at all. And when they tried to hike down to investigate, something even stranger happened. The group consisted of 6 friends who had been hiking together for years. There was Marcus Chen, a software engineer who organized the trip, Jennifer Walsh, a high school science teacher, brothers Tom and Kevin Bradley, who ran a local bike shop, Rebecca Martinez, a nurse, and David Kim, a commercial photographer who brought professional camera equipment on every hike. They'd chosen the Mount Wilson Trail, a challenging but familiar route they'd completed together at least a dozen times. The plan was simple: hike up on Saturday, camp overnight near the summit, and return Sunday afternoon. Saturday went perfectly. They made good time, set up camp, and spent the evening around a campfire sharing stories and watching the sun set over the Pacific Ocean. When they turned in for the night, they could see the familiar glow of Los Angeles below them, millions of lights creating an orange haze against the darkness. Everything was completely normal, but when they woke up on Sunday morning, July 13th, and walked to the overlook point for sunrise, that's when their weekend became a nightmare. Marcus was the first to notice. He'd brought binoculars to look for birds and turned them toward the valley below out of habit. He froze mid-scan and lowered the binoculars, rubbing his eyes. Then he looked again and called the others over. Jennifer looked through the binoculars next and let out an audible gasp. One by one, each member of the group confirmed what they were seeing. The Los Angeles basin was empty. Not destroyed, not obscured by fog or smog, but genuinely empty. They could see the natural geography perfectly, the valleys and riverbeds, but absolutely no trace of human civilization. David immediately started taking photographs with his high-resolution camera. Through his telephoto lens, he could see details that made the situation even more impossible. Where downtown LA should have been, he saw pristine wilderness. Where the Santa Monica freeway should have cut through the landscape, there was open grassland. The entire sprawling metropolitan area, home to millions of people, had simply vanished. Think about this for a moment. These weren't tourists unfamiliar with the area. These were locals who had lived in LA for years, who knew exactly what they should be seeing from this vantage point. Now, here's where it gets even stranger. The group decided they needed to investigate. They packed up their camp quickly and started descending the trail toward where the city should be. But as they hiked down, they began experiencing something that defied all logic. The trail itself started changing. Markers they'd seen on the way up were in different positions. A footbridge they had crossed was suddenly made of different materials. Kevin noticed it first and pointed it out to the others. They stopped and looked around, and that's when they realized the entire landscape was somehow shifting around them. Rebecca pulled out her phone to call for help, but there was no signal. That wasn't unusual in the mountains, but what was unusual was what her GPS showed. According to the satellite positioning, they were standing in the middle of downtown Los Angeles, not in the mountains at all. The coordinates placed them at the intersection of 5th and Grand Avenue, in the heart of the city, yet they were clearly surrounded by wilderness and mountain terrain. All 6 phones showed the same impossible location data. They continued descending for another hour, but the strange shifts kept happening. Trees would look different when they glanced away and back. The sun seemed to be in the wrong position. And most disturbing of all, they started hearing sounds that didn't match what they were seeing. Traffic noise from a city that wasn't there, distant sirens, the rumble of what sounded like a subway train, yet they were in the wilderness. Then, as they rounded a familiar bend in the trail, everything suddenly snapped back to normal. Los Angeles appeared before them, exactly as it should be, sprawling and unmistakable. The group practically ran down the rest of the trail and drove straight to the local ranger station to report what they'd experienced. The rangers were polite but clearly skeptical. However, when David showed them his photographs, the rangers' expressions changed. The images clearly showed the empty basin, time-stamped and geotagged to that exact morning. The metadata was authentic and unaltered. These weren't doctored photos. They showed something that should be impossible. Some researchers who later examined the case believed the group experienced a temporary overlap with a parallel timeline where Los Angeles was never built. Others think they may have encountered what's called a thin place, a location where the barrier between different realities becomes permeable. The shifting landscape they experienced while descending could have been them moving between multiple alternate versions of the same location. Skeptics argue it was mass hallucination brought on by altitude sickness or dehydration, but all 6 hikers were experienced and well prepared, and none showed any symptoms of either condition. But here's what's truly fascinating. David's photographs exist. They've been examined by multiple experts and show no evidence of manipulation. 6 people with no history of psychological issues or substance abuse all witnessed the exact same impossible thing. Their GPS data from that morning shows coordinates that place them in 2 different locations simultaneously. So, what really happened on Mount Wilson that July morning? Did this group of hikers glimpse an alternate Earth where humanity never settled the Los Angeles basin? Is it possible that certain locations act as doorways between parallel realities? And if so, how many other hikers have seen similar things but dismissed them as tricks of the light? Absolutely insane when you consider the implications. Richard Ashford was a successful investment banker who traveled frequently between New York and London for work. On November the 17th, 2003, he boarded what he believed was his usual British Airways flight from JFK to Heathrow Airport. The flight itself seemed completely normal, but when the plane landed and he made his way through what should have been one of the world's busiest airports, he noticed something was deeply wrong. The airport was tiny, old-fashioned, and nearly empty. When he took a taxi to where his usual hotel should be in central London, he found himself driving through a much smaller city that looked like it belonged in the early 19th century. According to everyone he encountered, London existed, but it was merely a modest town of about 50,000 people. The massive global metropolis he knew had simply never developed. Ashford was 38 years old and had been making the New York to London trip at least twice a month for 7 years. He knew Heathrow Airport intimately, had his favorite restaurants there, and could navigate the terminals with his eyes closed. He always stayed at the same hotel, the Marriott on Grosvenor Square in Mayfair, and had client meetings scheduled for the following morning at offices in Canary Wharf. This was supposed to be just another routine business trip. He'd even watched the same in-flight movie he'd seen on previous flights and ordered his usual gin and tonic. When the plane touched down after the 7-hour flight, the captain announced their arrival at London Heathrow just as expected. But as Ashford gathered his carry-on luggage and prepared to deplane, he noticed the other passengers looked confused. The terminal visible through the aircraft windows looked nothing like Heathrow's modern glass and steel structures. It resembled something from a completely different era, more like a small regional airport from the 1940s or 50s. Inside the terminal, Ashford's confusion turned to genuine alarm. The building was cramped, dimly lit, and nearly deserted. There were no crowds of international travelers, no duty-free shops, no electronic departure boards. Just a handful of gates and a few people in outdated clothing moving slowly through the space. He approached what appeared to be an information desk and asked the elderly woman working there how to get to central London. She looked at him strangely and said, "Well, sir, you're only about 15 miles from town. Any taxi can take you there." When he asked about the tube, she looked confused and asked what he meant. Now, here's where it gets absolutely insane. Ashford went outside and found a taxi, an actual black London cab that looked authentic. He gave the driver the address of his hotel on Grosvenor Square. The driver nodded and started driving, but the route was completely wrong. Instead of the familiar journey through Hounslow and into West London, they drove through countryside and small villages. After about 30 minutes, they entered what the driver called London, but it was nothing like the city Ashford knew. Imagine this for a moment. You've been to a city dozens of times. You know its streets and landmarks intimately. And suddenly, it's been replaced by something completely different. The London Ashford saw through the taxi window was small, provincial, and appeared frozen in time around the year 1800. There were cobblestone streets, gas lamps, horses and carriages alongside a few early automobiles. Buildings were low-rise, mostly brick and stone construction. There was no modern architecture whatsoever. When they arrived at the coordinates where his hotel should have been, there was instead a small residential square with modest townhouses. The driver asked for payment in pounds, but when Ashford offered his usual British currency, the driver examined the bills with confusion, saying they looked strange and unfamiliar. Ashford ended up paying with American dollars, which the driver accepted reluctantly. Think about this. Here's a man who's traveled internationally for years, who knows London as well as he knows New York, standing in a version of the city that's completely unrecognizable. Ashford spent the next several hours walking through this strange alternate London in a state of shock. He tried to find recognizable landmarks. No Big Ben, no Houses of Parliament, no Tower Bridge. The Thames River was there, but it was smaller, with only simple wooden bridges crossing it. When he asked locals about famous London landmarks, they looked at him like he was insane. He went to what should have been the financial district and found only modest, mercantile buildings. He asked about the London Stock Exchange and was directed to a small trading house that looked like something from the Dickens era. Everyone he spoke with was polite, but clearly thought he was confused or perhaps mentally unwell. One man he talked to explained that London was a prosperous market town and regional capital, but nothing like the massive global center Ashford kept describing. As evening approached, Ashford found a small inn and paid for a room with American currency. He barely slept, lying awake trying to make sense of what was happening. Had he somehow traveled back in time? Was he in a parallel universe? Was he having a complete mental breakdown? But when he woke up the next morning, November 18th, and looked out his window, modern London had returned. Double-decker buses, contemporary cars, glass skyscrapers in the distance. Everything was as it should be. He rushed downstairs and found himself in a completely different building, a modern, budget hotel. The innkeeper from the night before was gone. When he went outside, he was standing on a busy London street he recognized immediately. He took a taxi to Grosvenor Square, and his usual hotel was right there where it had always been. He checked his phone, which had been without service the entire previous day, and found 17 missed calls from colleagues wondering where he'd been for his scheduled meetings. Ashford documented everything in detailed notes he made that day. He kept the receipt from the strange inn, written in archaic handwriting and dated using an old calendar system. He'd taken several photographs with his digital camera of the alternate London, images that clearly showed the 19th century streets and buildings with metadata confirming the date and time. When he returned to New York, he consulted with psychologists who found no evidence of delusion or mental illness. The photographs were examined by experts who confirmed they hadn't been manipulated. Some researchers believe Ashford's flight somehow landed in a parallel timeline where the Industrial Revolution never transformed London into a global metropolis. Others think he experienced a temporary dimensional slip where he existed for several hours in an alternate version of England's history. Skeptics suggest he may have been drugged or experienced an elaborate hallucination. But this doesn't explain the physical evidence he brought back. So, what really happened to Richard Ashford? Did a routine business flight somehow land in a different reality? Is it possible that air travel, which takes us through the sky at high speeds, sometimes accidentally crosses dimensional boundaries? And if Ashford experienced this, how many other frequent travelers have found themselves in alternate versions of familiar cities but were too afraid to report it? Extremely creepy when you consider how thin the barrier between realities might actually be. Professional landscape photographer Elena Rodriguez had one of the most well-documented alternate timeline experiences ever recorded, and it happened in broad daylight in May of 2017. She had taken a train from Boston to New York City to shoot some urban landscape photographs for a major magazine assignment. She had her tickets, her itinerary, and her expensive camera equipment. But when her train arrived at what the conductor announced as Penn Station, she stepped onto the platform and found herself in a nearly empty rail depot in a small town. Outside, where Manhattan should have been, she found rolling hills and scattered villages. In a state of absolute panic, she began photographing everything around her, and those photographs still exist today. What they show is impossible, yet there they are. Elena was 32 years old and had built a successful career photographing urban landscapes for major publications, including National Geographic and Architectural Digest. She'd been to New York City at least 50 times, knew Manhattan intimately, and had photographed the city from every possible angle. On May 9th, 2017, she boarded the 11 a.m. Amtrak Northeast Regional from Boston's South Station. Assigned to shoot a photo essay about New York's changing skyline, she carried 2 professional Canon cameras, multiple lenses, and had a detailed shot list from her editor. The assignment was straightforward, and the train ride was supposed to take just under 4 hours. The journey started normally. Elena worked on her laptop, reviewed her shot list, and watched the familiar New England landscape pass by her window. The train made its scheduled stops in Providence, New Haven, and Stamford. Everything was completely routine. She even recognized other regular commuters she'd seen on this route before. But as the train entered what should have been the final approach into Manhattan, she noticed something strange. Looking out the window, she didn't see the usual urban sprawl and tunnel systems that marked the approach to Penn Station. When the conductor announced their arrival at New York Penn Station and the train came to a complete stop, Elena gathered her equipment and prepared to disembark. But stepping onto the platform, she immediately knew something was catastrophically wrong. The station was tiny, nothing like the massive underground complex that serves over 600,000 passengers daily. It was a small, old-fashioned depot with maybe 4 or 5 platforms exposed to open air, with a handful of confused-looking passengers wandering around. Think about this for a moment. You're a professional photographer who's been to a city dozens of times, and suddenly you arrive at a completely different place that claims to be the same destination. Elena's first instinct was that the train had stopped at the wrong station, but the conductor insisted this was Penn Station, New York. When she went outside, her heart nearly stopped. Where the towering skyscrapers of Manhattan should have dominated the skyline, she saw rolling green hills dotted with small villages and farmland. No Empire State Building, no One World Trade Center, no endless grid of streets packed with yellow cabs and millions of people. Now, here's where it gets even stranger. Elena's professional training immediately kicked in. If something impossible is happening, document it. She pulled out both her cameras and started shooting everything. She photographed the small depot with its hand-painted wooden sign reading Penn Station. She photographed the landscape where New York City should have been, clearly showing pastoral countryside stretching for miles. She photographed the few locals who were there, dressed in clothing that looked decades out of date. She shot nearly 300 images in the span of about 45 minutes, each one time-stamped and GPS tagged by her camera's metadata. The locals she approached looked at her with confusion and concern when she frantically asked where New York City was. An elderly man told her kindly that she was in New York, in a town of about 12,000 people. When she described Manhattan, the skyscrapers, the millions of residents, he shook his head and suggested she might be confused or unwell. One woman offered to take her to the local doctor, clearly worried about Elena's mental state. But Elena wasn't confused. She knew exactly what should be there, and it simply wasn't. She tried calling her editor, but her cell phone had no signal. Not unusual in some rural areas, but according to her phone's GPS, she was standing in Midtown Manhattan. The coordinates placed her at 8th Avenue and 33rd Street, right where Penn Station should be. Yet she was surrounded by countryside. She attempted to find a taxi to take her into the city, but the only vehicle available was an old pickup truck, whose driver offered to take her to what he called the town center, a few blocks away. Elena spent 2 hours in this alternate reality, photographing everything and taking detailed notes. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the small town vanished. She described it later as feeling like the air shimmered for a moment, and then she was standing in the actual Penn Station, the massive underground complex she knew, surrounded by thousands of rushing commuters. The noise and chaos of real New York City crashed over her like a wave. She stood frozen for several minutes, people flowing around her, trying to comprehend what had just happened. When she returned to Boston that evening, she immediately downloaded all her photographs. The images from those 2 hours showed exactly what she'd seen: a small rural train depot, rolling hills, and a tiny town where America's largest city should have been. She took the memory cards to 3 separate forensic imaging experts. All 3 confirmed the photographs were authentic, unmanipulated, with valid metadata, showing they were taken on May 9th, 2017, with GPS coordinates placing them in central Manhattan. Some researchers who studied Elena's case believe she experienced one of the most well-documented dimensional slips on record. The photographs provide physical evidence that she genuinely visited an alternate timeline where New York City never developed beyond a small town. Others suggest she may have briefly existed in a parallel universe where American history unfolded very differently, perhaps where the Dutch settlement of New Amsterdam never grew into a major metropolis. Skeptics argue the photos could be from somewhere else, but the GPS metadata is embedded in the files and matches Penn Station's exact location. But here's what makes this case truly extraordinary. Elena Rodriguez is a professional photographer with an impeccable reputation. She has absolutely nothing to gain from fabricating this story. The photographs exist and have been verified as authentic by multiple independent experts. The metadata is consistent and cannot be easily faked. So, what really happened? Did Elena's train somehow travel between parallel timelines during that 4-hour journey from Boston? Is it possible that our transportation systems sometimes accidentally cross dimensional boundaries? And how many other travelers have arrived at the wrong version of their destination, but had no way to prove what they'd seen? Absolutely fascinating and deeply unsettling when you really think about the implications. Hans Muller was a delivery driver for a major European shipping company, and he had driven the route from Hamburg to Berlin at least 3 times a week for 12 years. In August of 2009, he loaded his truck as usual and headed south on the A24 Autobahn toward Germany's capital city. But after hours of driving on increasingly unfamiliar roads, he realized something was terribly wrong. His GPS showed him approaching Berlin, but the landscape around him didn't match what he knew. When he finally reached the coordinates where Berlin should be, he found himself in a large forested area with only a few small villages scattered around. No sign of the massive city of 3.5 million people. No government buildings, no Berlin Wall historical sites, no evidence that a major capital had ever existed there. And when he tried to call his dispatcher, the response he got made everything even more bizarre. Muller was 46 years old and had been driving trucks for Deutsche Logistics for nearly 2 decades. He knew the Hamburg-Berlin route so well, he could practically drive it with his eyes closed. Every landmark, every rest stop, every exit was burned into his memory. On August 14, 2009, he departed Hamburg at 6 a.m. with a standard load of electronic equipment destined for a warehouse in Berlin's mid-district. He had the delivery address, the paperwork, and had made this exact trip, literally hundreds of times before. The weather was clear, traffic was light, and everything seemed perfectly normal. The first hour of the journey was routine. Muller stopped at his usual rest area near Gudau for coffee, exactly as he always did. He chatted with other drivers he recognized, checked his truck's cargo, and got back on the road. But as he continued south, he started noticing small things that felt off. Road signs he didn't recognize, exit numbers that seemed wrong. The landscape looked subtly different, though he couldn't quite pinpoint how. By the time he'd been driving for 3 hours, Muller knew something was seriously wrong. According to his GPS and the distance he'd traveled, he should be entering Berlin's outer suburbs, seeing the first signs of urban development. Instead, he was driving through increasingly dense forest. He pulled over and checked his GPS multiple times. It clearly showed him on the A24 approaching Berlin. But through his windshield, he saw only trees and the occasional small village. Think about this for a moment. You've driven the same route 3 times a week for 12 years, and suddenly the destination city has vanished. Muller continued driving, thinking perhaps he'd somehow gotten turned around despite what his GPS was telling him. But when he reached the exact coordinates where the city center should be, where the famous Brandenburg Gate and Reichstag buildings should have dominated the landscape, he found himself at a small crossroads in the middle of a forest. A hand-painted wooden sign indicated a village called Spandau, with a population of 800 people. Now, here's where it gets absolutely insane. Muller parked his truck and used his cell phone to call his dispatcher in Hamburg. The dispatcher answered immediately and asked why he was calling instead of completing his delivery. Muller explained that Berlin wasn't there, that he was in the middle of a forest. The dispatcher paused, clearly confused, and then said something that made Muller's blood run cold. She told him there must be some misunderstanding because the delivery address was in Spandau, the small village, not in any major city called Berlin. When Muller insisted he'd been making deliveries to Berlin for 12 years, the dispatcher asked if he was feeling all right and suggested he might need to see a doctor. Desperate to prove he wasn't losing his mind, Muller drove to the village of Spandau and found a small general store. He went inside and asked the elderly shopkeeper for directions to Berlin, describing the capital city, the government buildings, the millions of residents. The shopkeeper looked at him with genuine concern and said that while he'd heard travelers sometimes mention a place called Berlin, it was just a tiny hamlet about 20 kilometers east, nothing more than a few farms and a church. When Muller showed him the delivery paperwork with the Berlin address, the shopkeeper examined it curiously, remarking that the street names were unfamiliar to him. Muller spent the next 2 hours driving around the area in a state of near panic. He found the small hamlet the shopkeeper had mentioned, a cluster of maybe 30 buildings that locals referred to as Berlin. But there was no trace of the massive historical city he knew, no remnants of the wall that had divided the city for decades, no grand boulevards or government districts, just quiet countryside and scattered farming communities. He took photographs with his phone of the empty landscape, of the road signs pointing to tiny villages instead of a major capital, of his GPS showing him in central Berlin while he stood in a forest. Then, just as the sun began to set, Muller decided to head back north toward Hamburg, completely shaken and unsure of what was happening to him. But as he drove back onto the Autobahn, he felt a strange sensation, almost like driving through an invisible curtain. Suddenly, the Landscape changed. Within minutes, he started seeing familiar landmarks again. And when he looked in his rearview mirror, he could see the glow of a major city on the horizon behind him. Berlin had returned, or rather, he had returned to the Berlin he knew. When Mueller finally made it back to Hamburg late that night, he filed a detailed incident report with his company. He showed them the photographs from his phone, which clearly depicted the empty forest and tiny villages where Berlin should have been. The images were time-stamped and GPS tagged to locations in central Berlin. His employer sent him to a company doctor who found no evidence of stroke, seizure, or any medical condition that could explain the experience. The photographs were examined by the company's IT department and determined to be authentic and unaltered. Some researchers who later investigated Mueller's case believe he accidentally drove into a parallel timeline, where Berlin never recovered from medieval times and remained a tiny settlement. Others think he may have experienced a temporal slip, briefly driving through a version of Germany from hundreds of years in the past. The GPS anomaly showing him in central Berlin while photographing empty forest suggests he may have existed in two realities simultaneously for those few hours. Skeptics argue he may have experienced a fugue state or complex hallucination, but this doesn't explain the photographic evidence or the strange phone conversation with his dispatcher, who seemed to remember a completely different version of his employment history. So, what really happened to Hans Mueller on that August day? Did a routine delivery route somehow cross into an alternate timeline? Is it possible that Germany's Autobahn system, built over ancient roads and paths, sometimes acts as a conduit between parallel realities? And if Mueller drove into a version of Germany where Berlin never became a major city, what other versions of our world might be? Accessible through seemingly ordinary journeys? Extremely creepy when you consider that the road you travel every day might occasionally lead somewhere you never intended to go. Maria Santos had worked as a flight attendant for Brazilian Airlines for 15 years when she experienced something in January of 2012 that would end her career and change her life forever. She was working a domestic flight from Rio de Janeiro to São Paulo, one of South America's largest cities with over 22 million people in its metropolitan area. The flight itself was routine until they began their descent. Looking out the window during the approach, Maria noticed something that made her heart stop. Where the endless sprawl of São Paulo should have been below them, she saw only dense Atlantic rainforest stretching to the horizon. No buildings, no lights, no airport. The other flight attendants and several passengers saw it too. But when the plane landed moments later, they found themselves at a normal São Paulo airport as if nothing had happened. Except Maria had taken photographs through the window during those 3 minutes of descent. And what those photos show has never been explained. Maria was 39 years old and had been flying the Rio to São Paulo route, one of the busiest air corridors in South America, at least 4 times a week for over a decade. She knew every phase of the approach to Guarulhos International Airport by heart. On January 21st, 2012, she reported for her shift on TAM Airlines Flight 3167, a routine Saturday afternoon departure scheduled to take just over an hour. The Airbus A320 carried 143 passengers, mostly business travelers and families. Maria worked in the forward cabin with 2 other flight attendants, Carolina Mendez and Roberto Silva. The flight departed on time at 2:15 p.m. Maria went through her usual service routine, serving drinks and snacks, chatting with regular passengers she recognized from previous flights. Everything was completely normal. The weather was perfect. Clear skies with unlimited visibility. As they approached São Paulo and the captain announced they were beginning their descent, Maria took her jump seat near the forward exit door, right next to a window. This was standard procedure, and she'd done it thousands of times. But as the aircraft descended through 15,000 feet, Maria glanced out the window and felt her entire body go cold. Where the sprawling megalopolis of São Paulo should have been spreading in all directions below them, she saw only pristine rainforest. Think about this for a moment. São Paulo is one of the largest urban areas on the planet, visible from incredible distances. Its lights can be seen from space. Yet, through that window, Maria saw nothing but dense green canopy stretching endlessly in every direction. She immediately called Carolina over and pointed out the window. Carolina looked, gasped, and grabbed Roberto. All 3 flight attendants pressed their faces to the windows, staring in disbelief at the impossible landscape below. Then passengers started noticing. A businessman in seat 4A rang his call button frantically, asking what was wrong, why the city wasn't there. A woman across the aisle started crying, pointing out her window at the empty wilderness below. Within seconds, multiple passengers were seeing the same impossible thing. Now, here's where it gets even stranger. Maria's training kicked in even through her shock. She pulled out her personal cell phone and started taking photographs through the window. She shot nearly 20 images in rapid succession, capturing the dense rainforest where millions of people and thousands of buildings should have been visible. She photographed what should have been downtown São Paulo, showing only trees and rivers. She photographed the area where Guarulhos Airport should have been, showing only untouched forest. All while her phone's GPS confirmed they were exactly where they should be, on final approach to São Paulo. The other passengers who could see out the windows were panicking now. Some were crying, others shouting questions at the flight attendants. Maria tried to keep everyone calm while simultaneously feeling her own terror rising. Through the cockpit door, she could hear the pilots communicating normally with air traffic control, receiving standard landing instructions. But how could they be receiving instructions to land at an airport that clearly wasn't there? Then, as the aircraft descended through 5,000 feet, something absolutely impossible happened. The city appeared. Not gradually, but instantly, as if someone had flipped a switch. One moment, virgin rainforest. The next moment, the complete urban sprawl of São Paulo spreading beneath them in all its massive complexity. Buildings, highways, the airport runway, everything suddenly existed again. The transition was so abrupt that several passengers screamed. Maria later described it as feeling like the plane had passed through an invisible barrier or membrane between 2 different realities. The landing was completely normal. The pilot seemed unaware that anything unusual had occurred. When Maria tried to tell the captain what they'd witnessed, he looked at her with confusion and mild concern, saying he'd seen São Paulo the entire approach and suggesting she might be unwell. But Maria knew what she'd seen, and so did Carolina, Roberto, and at least 30 passengers who'd had window seats on the right side of the aircraft. After landing, Maria immediately went to the airline's operations office and filed an incident report. She showed them the photographs on her phone. The images were crystal clear, time-stamped, and GPS tagged to locations directly over São Paulo's city center. They showed exactly what she'd described: pristine Atlantic rainforest, where one of the world's great cities should have been. The airline safety department launched an investigation. The photographs were examined by digital forensics experts who confirmed they were authentic, unaltered, and taken exactly when and where Maria claimed. 12 passengers came forward to corroborate Maria's account, all describing the same 3-minute period when São Paulo vanished beneath them. The airline interviewed them separately, and their stories matched perfectly. But the cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder showed nothing unusual. The pilots had experienced a completely normal approach and landing. Air traffic control confirmed continuous radar contact throughout, showing the aircraft on a standard approach path. Some aviation researchers believe the aircraft briefly flew through a parallel timeline where São Paulo never developed beyond a small settlement. The fact that only people on one side of the plane saw it suggests the phenomenon may have been localized to a specific area of space the aircraft passed through. Others think it was evidence of what physicists call quantum superposition on a massive scale, where 2 different versions of reality briefly existed simultaneously. Skeptics argue it was mass hallucination caused by atmospheric conditions, but this doesn't explain the photographic evidence or why the pilots saw nothing unusual. But here's what's truly disturbing. Maria's photographs exist. They've been analyzed by experts and deemed authentic. 33 people witnessed the same impossible event simultaneously. So, what really happened at 15,000 feet over Brazil that January afternoon? Did Flight 3167 briefly enter an alternate timeline? Is it possible that aircraft, traveling at high speeds through the atmosphere, sometimes accidentally cross dimensional boundaries? And if an entire plane full of people can witness a major city disappear and reappear in minutes, how stable is the reality we think we're living in? Absolutely terrifying when you consider the implications. And if you thought that was already unsettling, just wait for what comes next. Dr. James Chen was a respected physicist from MIT who traveled to Tokyo in March of 2015 to present his research at a major international conference. He had been to Tokyo twice before and was familiar with the city. But this time, from the moment his plane landed, everything felt wrong. The airport looked different, smaller and older than he remembered. When he took a taxi to what should have been his hotel in Shibuya, one of Tokyo's busiest districts, he found himself in a quiet coastal town. Over the next 3 days, Dr. Chen methodically documented everything he could. He spoke with locals who insisted that while Japan existed and was prosperous, Tokyo had never grown beyond a modest fishing village of a few thousand people. The massive megalopolis, the neon lights, the towering skyscrapers, none of it had ever existed in this version of reality. He filled an entire notebook with observations, took hundreds of photographs, and collected local newspapers. When he finally returned home, he brought this evidence with him. And it's absolutely chilling. Dr. Chen was 42 years old and held a doctorate in theoretical physics with a specialization in quantum mechanics and space-time theories. He'd published over 30 peer-reviewed papers and was known for his rigorous scientific approach to everything. He'd been invited to present his research on quantum entanglement at the International Physics Symposium, scheduled for March 16th through 18th, 2015, at what should have been the Tokyo International Forum. He had visited Tokyo in 2009 and 2012 for previous conferences and had pleasant memories of the vibrant city. His flight from Boston to Tokyo on March 15th was completely normal, a 14-hour journey, with the usual movie selections and meal service. But when the plane began its descent into what the captain announced as Narita International Airport, Chen looked out his window and felt the first stirrings of confusion. The airport visible below looked much smaller than he remembered, more like a regional facility than one of Asia's major international hubs. He dismissed it initially, thinking perhaps they were approaching from a different direction. After landing and clearing customs, Chen took a taxi and showed the driver the address of his hotel, the Shibuya Excel Hotel, located in the heart of one of Tokyo's most famous entertainment and shopping districts. The driver looked at the address with confusion and asked Chen to clarify. When Chen described Shibuya, the famous crossing, the towering buildings, the driver shook his head politely and said, "There must be some mistake." He drove Chen to what he insisted was Shibuya, but it was nothing like what Chen remembered. Think about this for a moment. You're a scientist, trained to observe and analyze, and you arrive in a city you've visited twice before, only to find it completely transformed. Chen found himself in a quiet coastal town with traditional wooden buildings, fishing boats, and a small harbor, and a population that couldn't have been more than a few thousand people. No skyscrapers, no neon signs, no crowds of people. Just a peaceful seaside settlement that looked like it belonged in a different century. Now here's where Chen's scientific training became crucial. Instead of panicking, he began systematic documentation. He pulled out his notebook and started recording everything he observed. He photographed buildings, street signs, and landscapes. He interviewed locals in his basic Japanese, asking about Tokyo's history and size. Every person he spoke with confirmed the same thing. Tokyo was this small fishing village and always had been. Japan's capital was in Kyoto, where it had been for centuries. They looked at him strangely when he described a Tokyo of 37 million people. Chen spent 3 days in this alternate Japan, and his documentation became increasingly detailed. He visited what locals called the town hall and examined historical records. According to their documents, Tokyo had never experienced the rapid industrialization and growth that transformed it in our timeline. The Great Kanto earthquake of 1923, which destroyed much of Tokyo and led to its modern rebuilding in our reality, had apparently never occurred here. Japan was prosperous and technologically advanced, but its development had followed a completely different path. He collected newspapers from those 3 days. The Asahi Shimbun, a real Japanese newspaper, existed but reported on a very different Japan. The articles discussed national politics centered in Kyoto, regional fishing industry news, and cultural events in various provincial towns. There were no references to Tokyo as a major city, no mention of the massive urban sprawl that dominates our version of Japan. Chin carefully preserved these newspapers, folding them and storing them in his luggage. But here's what makes this case extraordinary. Dr. Chen never found the conference he was supposed to attend. The Tokyo International Forum didn't exist in this reality. When he tried to contact the conference organizers using the email address on his invitation, his messages bounced back as undeliverable. His attempts to call MIT from his hotel room resulted in strange errors, as if the phone system couldn't connect to the numbers he was dialing. He was, for all practical purposes, stranded in a parallel version of Japan. On the third day, March 18th, Chen decided he needed to return home. He took a taxi back to the airport, and during that drive, he experienced what he later described as a sensation of pressure, almost like his ears popping during altitude changes. When they arrived at the airport, it had transformed back into the massive Narita International Airport he recognized. Inside the terminal, everything was modern and bustling with international travelers. Tokyo had returned, or rather, he had returned to his version of Tokyo. Chen flew back to Boston in a state of shock, but with his evidence carefully packed. Once home, he presented everything to colleagues in MIT's physics department. The photographs showed the small fishing village with GPS metadata, confirming they were taken in Tokyo. The newspapers were authentic Japanese publications, printed on real newsprint with valid dates, but describing a Japan that didn't match recorded history. The notebook contained detailed observations written in Chen's own handwriting, including sketches of the altered geography. Some physicists who examined Chen's evidence believe he experienced quantum decoherence on a macroscopic scale, somehow becoming temporarily aligned with a parallel timeline. Chen's own theory, which he published in just a controversial paper, suggests that consciousness might occasionally slip between quantum probability waves, allowing individuals to briefly experience alternate outcomes of historical events. Others think his experience might have been related to his research on quantum entanglement, as if his work somehow made him more susceptible to dimensional shifts. Skeptics argue he may have visited a different location entirely and become confused, but this doesn't explain the GPS data or the authentic newspapers describing an alternate Japanese history. But think about this. Dr. James Chen is not some random person claiming to have visited another dimension. He's a respected physicist with impeccable credentials who approached this experience with scientific rigor. He didn't just tell a story, he collected evidence, documented observations, and brought back physical artifacts that shouldn't exist according to our understanding of history. So, what really happened? Did Chen's flight to Tokyo somehow deliver him to a parallel timeline? Is it possible that certain individuals, perhaps due to their work with quantum mechanics, become more vulnerable to slipping between realities? And if a physicist studying the nature of reality itself can experience this, what does that tell us about how stable our own timeline actually is? Extremely fascinating and deeply unsettling. In June of 2013, college friends Tyler Matthews and Josh Rivera decided to take a road trip from Los Angeles to the Grand Canyon. The route they planned would take them directly through Las Vegas, where they had hotel reservations for one night. Both of them had been to Vegas before and were looking forward to spending an evening on the Strip. But as they drove east on Interstate 15 through the Mojave Desert, something impossible happened. They drove right past where Las Vegas should be. Tyler was driving, and Josh was navigating with both a paper map and GPS, and both showed they were going directly through the city. But through their windshield, they saw only empty desert. They pulled over, completely confused, and checked their location multiple times. According to every tool they had, they were in the center of Las Vegas. But looking around in every direction, there was nothing but sand, rock, and scattered Joshua trees. No casinos, no hotels, no lights, no roads, no sign that millions of people had ever built a city there. And then they noticed something that made the situation even more terrifying. Tyler Matthews was 23 years old, a computer science major at UCLA. Josh Rivera was 22, studying mechanical engineering at the same university. They'd been roommates and best friends since freshman year, and had planned this road trip for months as a celebration after finishing their final exams. They left Los Angeles on June 8, 2013, in Tyler's Honda Civic, loaded with camping gear, snacks, and a carefully planned itinerary. The drive to Las Vegas should have taken about 4 hours, and they had reservations at the Luxor Hotel for that Saturday night. The first part of the journey was completely normal. They drove through the desert, listening to music, talking about their summer plans. Both of them had been to Las Vegas before for 21st birthday celebrations and knew what to expect. As they drove through Barstow and continued east, they started anticipating the first glimpses of the city's distinctive skyline. But as the miles passed and they should have been seeing signs of approaching Vegas, the desert around them remained empty. Josh was the first to notice something was wrong. He was tracking their progress on his phone's GPS and checking it against the paper road atlas he'd brought. "We should be seeing the city by now," he said, looking up from the map. "According to this, we're only about 20 miles out." Tyler scanned the horizon. Nothing but desert in every direction, no glow of lights, no distant buildings, nothing. They drove another 15 minutes and the GPS showed them getting closer to the city center, but the landscape remained completely barren. Think about this for a moment. You're driving toward a city of 2 million people, one of the most famous destinations in America, visible from miles away because of its lights and massive casino buildings. And it's simply not there. Tyler pulled off at what the GPS indicated was the Las Vegas Boulevard exit, but there was no exit. The highway just continued straight through empty desert. They pulled over onto the shoulder, completely baffled. Now, here's where it gets even stranger. Josh got out of the car with his phone, checking and rechecking the GPS coordinates. Tyler grabbed the paper map and compared it to their surroundings. Every piece of navigation equipment they had insisted they were in central Las Vegas, right near the famous Strip. Josh's phone showed they were standing at the coordinates for the Bellagio Hotel. Tyler's GPS showed the same thing. But surrounding them in every direction was nothing but Mojave Desert wilderness. Then Josh noticed something that made his blood run cold. He pointed to the east and his voice shook as he spoke. "Tyler, look at the ground." Tyler walked over and saw what Josh was pointing at. In the sand, clearly visible, were the remnants of old roads, not ancient trails, but relatively modern paved roads that had been buried by drifting sand and desert erosion. They could make out the faint grid pattern of streets, partially exposed and weathered, as if a city had once existed here, but had been abandoned and reclaimed by the desert decades or even centuries ago. They started walking, following these buried road traces. Within a few hundred yards, they found more evidence. Fragments of concrete foundations poking through the sand, rusted pieces of metal that might have been structural supports, small pieces of weathered glass and ceramic. It looked like archaeological ruins of a city that had existed long ago and been completely consumed by the desert. But according to everything they knew, Las Vegas was a thriving modern city that should be right here, right now. Tyler pulled out his camera and started documenting everything. He photographed the buried roads, the foundation fragments, the GPS coordinates on both of their phones, showing them in downtown Las Vegas. Josh tried calling their hotel to cancel their reservation, but the number didn't work. He searched for the Luxor Hotel online, and the website didn't exist. He searched for Las Vegas news, and the search results showed only historical references to a small railroad town that had been abandoned in the early 1900s. They spent nearly 2 hours in that spot, walking around in a state of absolute confusion and growing fear. The sun was setting, and they realized they needed to make a decision. Continue to the Grand Canyon, turn back to Los Angeles. They had no explanation for what was happening. Finally, they decided to keep driving east, hoping to find someone who could explain what they were seeing or not seeing. As they got back in the car and merged onto the highway, Tyler felt that same strange sensation that others have reported, like driving through an invisible barrier or membrane. Suddenly, about 5 miles down the road, Las Vegas appeared on the horizon, not gradually, but all at once. The entire city materialized as if it had been hidden behind a curtain that had just been pulled away. Within minutes, they were driving past familiar casinos and hotels, surrounded by traffic and the normal chaos of the Las Vegas Strip. They were so shaken they drove straight to their hotel, checked in, and spent the entire evening trying to make sense of what had happened. Tyler downloaded his photographs from the camera. The images showed exactly what they'd seen: empty desert at GPS coordinates that placed them in central Las Vegas, buried roads, and scattered ruins where a modern city should have been. The metadata confirmed the location and timestamps. When they returned to Los Angeles 2 days later, they showed the evidence to friends and family. Most people dismissed it as some kind of GPS glitch or suggested they had gotten lost in the desert. But both Tyler and Josh know what they experienced. Some researchers who later examined their photographs believe they briefly drove through a parallel timeline where Las Vegas never recovered from its abandonment in the early 20th century, where it remained a ghost town, consumed by the desert. Others think they may have experienced a temporal anomaly, seeing the same location in a different time period, perhaps a future where Las Vegas had been abandoned and reclaimed by nature. But here's what makes this case truly disturbing. The photographs show buried roads and ruins in the exact location where Las Vegas should have been. Two intelligent, sober college students both witnessed the same impossible thing. Their navigation equipment placed them in a major city, while their eyes showed them empty desert and ancient ruins. So, what really happened on Interstate 15 that June day? Did Tyler and Josh accidentally drive through a dimensional overlap, where they could see multiple versions of the same location simultaneously? Were those ruins they found evidence of a future where Las Vegas has been abandoned? Or were they seeing a parallel timeline that split from ours decades ago? And here's the truly terrifying question. If an entire major city can simply not exist when you arrive at its location, how do we know any place will be there when we expect it? Extremely creepy when you really think about it. On a flight from Paris to Beijing in September of 2016, British tourist Amanda Fletcher was sitting by the window, watching the landscape pass below when the pilot announced they were flying over Moscow. Amanda had never been to Russia before, but knew Moscow was one of the world's great cities with over 12 million people. Curious to see it from the air, she pressed her face to the window and raised her camera. What she photographed in the next 60 seconds has baffled experts ever since. Her images clearly show the landscape below, geotagged with GPS coordinates, placing them directly over where Moscow should be. But instead of the sprawling Russian capital with its distinctive architecture and the famous Kremlin, her photos show only vast wilderness, dense forests, rivers, and a few tiny villages connected by dirt roads. No trace of a major city. The images were time-stamped, geotagged, and taken on a verifiable flight. Other passengers who were awake saw the same thing. The airline tried to confiscate her camera when they landed. She refused, and those photographs still exist today, challenging everything we think we know about the stability of our reality. Amanda Fletcher was a 34-year-old photography teacher from Manchester who was traveling to Beijing for a teaching conference. She'd booked Air France Flight 258, a direct 11-hour flight departing Paris, Charles de Gaulle Airport on September 14, 2016. Amanda always requested window seats on long flights because she loved photographing landscapes and cloud formations from above. She had her professional Nikon camera with her, equipped with GPS geotagging capability that automatically embedded location coordinates into every photo she took. The flight departed on schedule at 10:30 a.m. and proceeded normally for the first 6 hours. Amanda ate her meal, watched a movie, and dozed for a while. When she woke up, it was late afternoon, and the captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing they were entering Russian airspace and would soon be flying over Moscow. Amanda immediately became alert. She'd seen countless photographs of Moscow's iconic architecture, the colorful onion domes of St. Basil's Cathedral, the red walls of the Kremlin, the massive urban sprawl. This was her chance to see it from 35,000 feet. She readied her camera and pressed her face against the window, looking down at the landscape below. The weather was perfectly clear, offering unlimited visibility, and what she saw made absolutely no sense. Where one of Europe's greatest cities should have been spreading for miles in every direction, she saw only wilderness, dense, unbroken forests stretching to the horizon, rivers winding through the landscape, and here and there, tiny clusters of what looked like primitive villages, with maybe a dozen buildings each, connected by narrow dirt paths. Think about this for a moment. Moscow is one of the largest cities in Europe, with a population of over 12 million people. Its distinctive landmarks are visible from incredible distances. Yet, through that airplane window, Amanda saw nothing but untouched, East wilderness. She started taking photographs immediately, shooting frame after frame of the impossible landscape below. Her camera's GPS system was embedding coordinates into each image, confirming they were directly over Moscow's city center. Now, here's where it gets even stranger. The man sitting next to Amanda, a German businessman named Klaus Weber, noticed her reaction and asked what was wrong. She pointed out the window and he looked. His face went pale. He pulled out his own phone and started taking pictures. Across the aisle, a Chinese woman traveling with her teenage daughter also looked out and gasped audibly. Within minutes, multiple passengers on the right side of the aircraft were pressing against their windows, staring in disbelief at the empty wilderness below where Moscow should have been. Amanda continued photographing for about 60 seconds, capturing dozens of high-resolution images. She photographed what should have been Red Square, showing only forest. She photographed where the Moscow River should have been, cutting through the urban landscape, showing only a small natural river with no bridges or development. She photographed in every direction, and nowhere was there any sign of a city. The passengers who were witnessing this started murmuring to each other in different languages, all expressing the same confusion and fear. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the wilderness vanished. Amanda later described it as like watching a special effect in a movie. The forest seemed to shimmer for a moment, and then Moscow materialized below them. Suddenly, there were the familiar landmarks, the sprawling city, the buildings and roads, and 12 million people. The transition was so abrupt that several passengers cried out in shock. Amanda kept photographing, now capturing images of normal Moscow, trying to document what had just happened. The rest of the flight to Beijing was tense. Amanda compared notes with Klaus Weber and the other, passengers who'd seen the impossible landscape. They all described the same thing. Moscow had simply not been there for approximately 1 minute, replaced by wilderness that looked like it belonged centuries in the past, or in some alternate version of Russia where the city had never been built. When they landed in Beijing, Amanda expected to simply continue on her way, but as she was collecting her luggage, 2 airline officials approached her and asked to speak with her privately. In a small office, they asked if she'd taken photographs during the flight. When she confirmed she had, they requested that she delete them, claiming they violated airline policy. Amanda, sensing something was wrong, refused. The officials became more insistent, even offering her compensation for the inconvenience. When she still refused and threatened to call the British embassy, they reluctantly let her go. But the encounter made it clear the airline knew something unusual had happened and wanted no evidence of it to exist. Back in Manchester, Amanda immediately backed up all her photographs to multiple locations. She had 47 images taken during that 1-minute window over Moscow, and every single one showed pristine wilderness with GPS coordinates confirming they were taken directly over the city center. She contacted aviation experts, geographers, and digital forensic specialists. All confirmed the images were authentic, unaltered, and genuinely showed what she claimed. The metadata was consistent and couldn't have been easily faked. 6 other passengers from that flight eventually came forward, corroborating Amanda's account. They had all seen the same thing from different window seats. Klaus Weber shared his phone photos, which showed the same wilderness landscape. The Chinese woman submitted a written testimony describing the experience, but Air France refused to comment, and the flight's cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder were never made available for independent examination. Some researchers believe the aircraft briefly flew through a parallel timeline, where Moscow never developed beyond small medieval settlements. Others think it may have been a temporal anomaly, where passengers simultaneously saw multiple time periods, perhaps a version of Russia from before Moscow became a major city. The fact that the phenomenon lasted exactly 60 seconds and affected only visual observation, while the plane's instruments remained normal, suggests it was localized to a specific area of space the aircraft passed through. Skeptics argue it was mass hallucination or atmospheric phenomena creating optical illusions. But this doesn't explain the photographic evidence with valid GPS metadata. So, what really happened at 35,000 feet over Russia that September afternoon? Did Air France Flight 258 briefly enter a parallel reality? Why did the airline try so hard to confiscate evidence of the event? Is it possible that commercial aircraft regularly experience these dimensional anomalies, but airlines suppress the reports to avoid panic? And if an entire plane full of passengers can witness a major city vanish for 60 seconds, what does that tell us about the nature of reality itself? Absolutely terrifying. Are you ready for the finale? Because what comes next is the most disturbing case we've ever covered. In November of 2010, the USS Newport, a United States Navy transport ship, was conducting routine exercises in the Pacific Ocean, approximately 300 miles west of San Francisco. At 0900 hours local time, the entire crew of 147 sailors simultaneously witnessed something that would lead to one of the most classified incidents in modern naval history. As they conducted their morning operations under clear skies with perfect visibility, crew members on deck noticed that the horizon looked wrong. Using the ship's powerful optical equipment, they scanned the California coastline, which should have been clearly visible at their distance. What they saw made absolutely no sense. The entire coastline was there. The geography was correct, but every single coastal city was missing. San Francisco, Los Angeles, San Diego, gone. Not destroyed, not abandoned, simply never built. Where these major cities should have been, they saw only pristine coastline, forests, and natural harbors with no signs of human development. For the next 4 hours, as the ship traveled parallel to the coast, they documented everything. They radioed nearby vessels and received responses from ships that also reported seeing the same impossible coastline. They took thousands of photographs and video recordings. And then, at precisely 1300 hours, everything suddenly snapped back to normal. The cities were there again, exactly as they should be. But for those 4 hours, 147 trained military personnel had witnessed an Earth where humanity's coastal cities had never been built. The incident was immediately classified, but 3 crew members later came forward to testify about what they saw that day. And their testimonies are absolutely identical. The USS Newport was a Lewis and Clark-class dry cargo ship serving in the United States Navy's Military Sealift Command. On November 6, 2010, she was conducting standard navigation and communication exercises in the Pacific as part of routine training operations. The weather conditions were ideal: clear skies, calm seas, visibility extending for over 50 miles. Commander Robert Hayes was in charge, with a crew that included experienced sailors, navigation specialists, and communications officers. These were trained observers, people whose job required them to accurately assess their surroundings, not the type to panic or imagine things. At exactly 9 a.m., Petty Officer Second Class Marcus Williams was on deck performing equipment checks when he looked toward the coast and stopped mid-task. Something about the horizon didn't look right. He called over to his colleague, Seaman Jennifer Park, and pointed. She looked through her binoculars and felt her stomach drop. Where the distinctive skyline of San Francisco should have been visible in the distance, she saw only natural coastline. They immediately reported this to the bridge. Commander Hayes ordered the ship's high-powered optical equipment to be trained on the California coast. What the crew saw through those powerful telescopes was impossible. The geography was absolutely correct. They could identify the distinctive shape of San Francisco Bay, the entrance to the Golden Gate, the peninsulas and coastal features. But where one of America's great cities should have stood with its iconic bridges and towering buildings, there was nothing. Just pristine wilderness. Rolling hills covered in native vegetation, natural harbors completely empty of human development. Think about this for a moment. 147 military personnel, trained observers with state-of-the-art equipment, all seeing the same impossible thing simultaneously. This wasn't one person having a hallucination. This was an entire ship's crew witnessing an alternate version of the California coastline. Commander Hayes immediately ordered a full documentation protocol. Every camera on board was deployed. Video equipment was set up. The ship's navigation systems confirmed their position exactly where they should be, 300 miles offshore. Now here's where it gets absolutely insane. As the USS Newport continued its course traveling south, parallel to the coast, the crew watched in real time as the alternate coastline scrolled past. Where Los Angeles should have been, with its massive port facilities and urban sprawl extending for miles, they saw only natural beaches and coastal forests. The Los Angeles River flowed naturally to the sea with no concrete channels or development. Where San Diego should have stood as a major naval base, they saw pristine natural harbors with no piers, no ships, no city whatsoever. The communications officer, Lieutenant David Park, tried radioing other vessels in the area. He made contact with 3 merchant ships and 1 Coast Guard cutter. Every single one reported seeing the same thing. The California coast had no cities. The radio operators sounded confused and frightened, asking if some kind of attack had occurred, if the cities had been somehow destroyed while they were at sea. But there was no debris, no smoke, no evidence of destruction. The cities had simply never existed. For 4 hours, the crew of the USS Newport documented this alternate reality. They took over 2,000 photographs and 47 hours of video footage. The ship's radar showed the correct coastline geography, but detected no urban infrastructure, no electromagnetic emissions from cities, no air traffic. It was as if they were looking at North America before European colonization, or perhaps a parallel Earth where humans had never built coastal cities at all. Junior officers took detailed logs. The ship's position was verified and re-verified. Everything confirmed they were exactly where they should be, seeing something that should be impossible. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell, the ship's executive officer, later described the atmosphere on board during those 4 hours as surreal and terrifying. Sailors who had grown up in California were looking at a version of their home state where their cities, their families, their entire lives had apparently never existed. Some crew members became emotional. Others couldn't stop staring at the impossible coastline. Commander Hayes maintained order and discipline, but even he later admitted the experience shook him to his core. Then, at exactly 1 p.m., 1300 hours military time, everything changed. Multiple crew members described feeling a sensation, like pressure dropping or a subtle vibration through the ship's hull. Suddenly, looking through the optical equipment, the cities were back. San Francisco appeared with all its bridges and buildings. Los Angeles sprawled across the landscape exactly as it should. San Diego's naval facilities were clearly visible. It was as if someone had flipped a switch, and the normal version of reality had been restored. Commander Hayes immediately radioed the other vessels they had been in contact with. All reported the same thing. The cities had reappeared at precisely 1300 hours. The USS Newport was ordered to return to port immediately. Upon docking in San Diego 2 days later, naval intelligence officers boarded the ship and confiscated all photographic and video evidence. Every crew member was interviewed separately and ordered to sign non-disclosure agreements. The incident was classified at the highest levels. The official explanation given to the crew was that they had witnessed a classified atmospheric testing operation that had created optical illusions. But 3 crew members eventually violated their NDAs and came forward. Petty Officer Marcus Williams testified to civilian researchers in 2014. Seaman Jennifer Park gave a detailed interview in 2016. And in 2018, Lieutenant David Park published a full account of the incident. All 3 described exactly the same events, down to specific details and timestamps. They all insisted it was not an optical illusion, not atmospheric phenomena, but a genuine observation of an alternate version of Earth. Some physicists who have studied the testimonies believe the USS Newport may have sailed through a region of space where parallel timelines briefly overlapped. The 4-hour duration suggests it wasn't a momentary glitch, but a sustained intersection between realities. Others think the ship may have experienced what's called quantum decoherence, briefly, existing in a superposition state where it could observe multiple versions of reality simultaneously. The fact that multiple ships in the area all reported the same observations rules out equipment malfunction or localized hallucination. But here's what makes this case the most disturbing of all the testimonies we've covered. This wasn't one person or a family or even a small group. This was 147 trained military observers with professional-grade documentation equipment, all witnessing the same impossible thing for 4 continuous hours. Multiple independent vessels confirmed the same observations. Thousands of photographs and hours of video were taken, all confiscated and classified by naval intelligence. 3 crew members risked their military careers and possible prosecution to testify about what they saw. So, what really happened 300 miles off the California coast in November of 2010? Did the USS Newport sail into a parallel timeline where humanity never built coastal cities? Is it possible that certain regions of the ocean act as gateways between alternate realities? Why did the phenomenon last exactly 4 hours before snapping back? And most disturbing of all, what happened to the photographic and video evidence the Navy confiscated? Does the military know more about parallel timelines and alternate realities than they're telling us? If 147 people can witness an entirely different version of Earth for 4 hours, how do we know which version of reality we're experiencing right now? Could our entire world shift to an alternate timeline? And would we even notice? Absolutely terrifying. And it makes you wonder how many other military crews have witnessed similar events that remain classified to this day.